I believe our adventure through time has taken a most serious turn.
Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. Welcome to my channel. If this is your first time here, please have a little look around if you like this video. This is actually episode 12, or part 12, of my exploration into the original series of the Twilight Zone. So the Twilight Zone was a phenomenal show. Literally, the terms become part of our language. Phenomenal show that ran from 1959 to 1964. The original series, the original 5-season series. It was created by Rod Serling, and he wrote most of the episodes. An absolute genius. And I'm looking at every single episode, usually in batches of 6. Almost all of the videos will be batches of 6 episodes. And that's what this one is. And as we're on part 12, we're now into season 3 of the show. So season 3 starts a new title sequence, which is my favourite title sequence out of all of them. So it's just the right audio that I like. You know, the words that he says and the images at the beginning are really cool. So I really like the season 3 title sequence. I think it's really cool. So it's just sort of evolved as it went along. And this little batch of episodes is really interesting because it's a bit of a mixed bag. Because on the one hand, 2 of the best episodes are in this batch of 6. And also, there's 2 episodes I didn't like. So by the end of this part, this video I'm doing now, there would have been 4 episodes I didn't like. 4 episodes I didn't like, which is not bad considering I'm getting close to 70 episodes now. It's like 68 or 69 or something like that. So 4 episodes in like is pretty good tally, to be fair. So let's crack on with the episodes. The first episode is an episode called 2. Okay, so the episode called 2 starts with this opening narration. This is a jungle, a monument built by nature honouring disuse, commemorating a few years of nature being left to its own devices. But it's another kind of jungle. The kind that comes in the aftermath of man's battles against himself. Hardly an important battle, not a Gettysburg or a Marne or an Iwo Jima, more like one insignificant corner patch in the crazy quilt of combat. But it was enough to end the existence of this little city. It's been 5 years since a human being walked these streets. This is the first day of the 6th year, as man used to measure time. The time perhaps 100 years from now, or sooner, or perhaps it's already happened 2 million years ago. The place, the signposts are in English, so that we may read them more easily, but the place is the Twilight Zone. Okay, so 2 was an episode where it was written by Montgomery Pittman, who had previously directed an episode, and this time he wrote and directed this episode, which is quite unusual, especially for the Twilight Zone. So that's an interesting thing just to start off with. And it's a 2-person episode, like so many of them were, and 2 very famous people that weren't quite as famous in those days. And there's Charles Bronson playing the male character, and the female character played by Elizabeth Montgomery, who became famous as the female lead in Bewitched. And these 2 excellent performances run through this episode that's about a post-nuclear city. That there's some suggestion that there's some war that's happened, and this city's been completely devastated, and these 2 people from opposite sides of the political fence, so they're enemies, they meet each other in this sort of devastated city, and there's not a lot of dialogue in it. They've got a language barrier anyway, so it's clear that Charles Bronson's American and Elizabeth Montgomery's character is Russian, or there's the implication she's Russian, and there's a lot of distrust. It's kind of playing against type in a way, because Charles Bronson is the one who's fed up with the war, doesn't want to have any more fighting, and Elizabeth Montgomery's character can't quite let it go, and she's like a coiled spring ready to blow, and she's much more tense and intense in the episode. But it's a really interesting set of performances. I think the episode's really good. and the ending narration is really awesome because it's very simple, but it's really effective. The music in it is really, really good. The music's provided by Van Cleve, who's done lots of other music for the Twilight Zone before, and the music's got a big part to play because there's so little dialogue, and yeah, there's some really good tension bits. There's one awesome shot where Charles Bronson's shaving, and in the mirror you get Elizabeth Montgomery doing stuff, and you can see both of them doing things, and they're both on screen at the same time, but because of the way the camera positions itself next to the mirror, I think that's awesome. It was a really good shot. So yeah, really interesting episode to start off this batch of 6. 2. So the next one was quite a good episode, I think, called The Arrival. And The Arrival opens with this opening narration. This object, should any of you have lived underground for the better part of your lives and never had occasion to look towards the sky, is an airplane. Its official designation, a DC-3. We offer this rather obvious comment because this particular airplane, the one you're looking at, is a freak. Now, most airplanes take off and land as per scheduled. On rare occasions they crash. But all airplanes can be counted on doing one or the other. Now, yesterday morning, this particular airplane ceased to be just a commercial carrier. As of its arrival, it became an enigma, a 7-ton puzzle made out of aluminium, steel, wire, and a few thousand other component parts, none of which add up to the right thing. In just a moment, we're going to show you the tail end of its history. We're going to give you 90% of the jigsaw pieces, and you and Mr. Sheckley here at the Federal Aviation Agency will assume the problem of putting them together along with finding the missing pieces. This we offer as the evening's hobby, a little extracurricular diversion, which is really the national pastime in the Twilight Zone. So The Arrival was written by Rod Serling, and it's about a plane that suddenly appears and there's no passengers, there's no crew, they don't understand what's going on, and everybody who looks at it seems to see a different number on the plane, like identification number, and it's confusing the inspector that's there to try and solve this mystery about what this plane's about. And essentially it becomes known by the end of it that it's like a ghost plane. It's an interesting episode. I think it's got some good performances in it. It's not good atmosphere. It's something that the Twilight Zone's done before. But yeah, I did think it was a good episode though. It's not like brilliant, but it was a nice little nugget. So yeah, The Arrival is a good solid entry into the series. And then the next episode is The Shelter. And The Shelter starts with this opening narration. What you're about to watch is a nightmare. It's not meant to be prophetic. It need not happen. It's the fervent and urgent prayer of all men of goodwill that it never shall happen. But in this place, in this moment, it does happen. This is the Twilight Zone. Okay, The Shelter is hugely important. It's a absolute landmark in the Twilight Zone run. It's really, really important. It's a fantastic episode, written by Rod Serling, very obviously written by Rod Serling because it's such a political episode. It's got a lot to say about the way that we turn on each other when we panic, and that mob mentality is such a dangerous thing in our society, and we see it massively at the moment. And this episode really speaks volumes. It's fantastic. And basically, it all centers around the fact that there's this threat of a nuclear bomb hitting the neighborhood. And Bill is the only guy in the neighborhood that's got a air raid shelter that would protect them beyond what everyone else has got, which is like just a basement that they can go to. And what happens is you get this desperate plea for everyone to go into Bill's very small shelter that he's just built for 3 people, him, his wife, and his son. They all want to go in there, and it gets more and more aggressive. It gets really nasty. There are elements where one of the characters just blatantly says, "You don't even you don't deserve to be in this shelter because it's not. You shouldn't even be in this country. You foreigners get everything when you don't deserve it," kind of thing. there's dialogue like that in it. It's really, really strong. It's fantastic. And it's performed brilliantly. It's pitched correctly. It's not overdone. It's so good. And the casting, sometimes I make comments about the casting. It's a really interesting situation where the one of his neighbours is played by Jack Albertson, who was Grandpa Joe in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. So you may recognise him straight away because I think he's got quite a distinctive voice. And he's one of the characters that goes overboard and gets like desperately aggressive trying to get into Bill's shelter. Yeah, and it's just really, really, really effective. It's a really important message, and Rod Serling does a fantastic job putting it across. And it's a real example of what the Twilight Zone can do. And now and again it pops up this really brilliant way of using this short story form to say something important about what we're like as humans. So the next one is called The Passersby. Okay, so The Passersby starts with this opening narration. This road is the afterwards of the Civil War. It began at Fort Sumter, South Carolina, and ended at a place called Appomattox. It's littered with the residue of broken battles and shattered dreams. In just a moment, you will enter a strange province that knows neither north nor south, a place we call the Twilight Zone. And this one was written by Rod Serling again. This is one of the two in this little batch that I didn't like. And I think it's a very worthy episode. It's got all the right motives behind it, but I just think it's a bit over melodramatic. It's a bit overdone. It's kind of like a bit of a one note episode that goes on for too long, and yeah, it just didn't land for me. So it's set in the Civil War, and it's again based around two characters with a few other characters come into it, but a lot of it's two characters, and they are watching these people pass by, and they are clearly wounded or maimed, or they're finding it hard to, they're not particularly mobile, but they're slowly walking down this road towards this destination that is not really clarified until the end. The audience knows what's happening. The two characters take a while to get it, the woman especially, and yeah, it's just not quite as subtle as you normally get with the Twilight Zone, I'd say. It does have an important message though, and yet again, I think because it really did affect him and he does feel really passionately about this, Rod Serling puts a great message out there about the futility and the tragedy of war, and the fact that, you know, victims of war come from both sides, and it's a story about loss and death, all built around this woman who's waiting for her husband to come back from the war. But yeah, just the way it's done didn't really get me really. So yeah, it's one of the few that I didn't like. It's the third one so far. So there's another one in a minute. So there'll be 4 by the end of this episode of this video I'm doing. But yeah, the third one so far that I didn't like. Okay, so the next one is A Game of Pool. A Game of Pool. This is a famous one. So yeah, this is written by George Clayton Johnson. And A Game of Pool begins with this opening narration. Jesse Cardiff, pool shark, best on Randolph Street, who will soon learn that trying to be the best at anything carries its own special risks, in or out of the Twilight Zone. So this one is a great two-parter, you know, two characters, sort of game of wits, game of battle of words or whatever. Jack Klugman plays a pool shark who wants to be the best in the world and wants to even be better than the legendary pool player that's on all the pictures on the walls, and he's played by John Winters. And thanks to the Twilight Zone, he gets a chance to spar against him in a pool match. And it's all about that idea that Jonathan Winter's character keeps saying to him, well, you might not want to win. If you do win, because there's a deal that if he wins, he gets his life, and if he loses, he dies. So that sort of plays out through the episode. But ultimately, there's a really cool final narration, which is summing up the negative consequence of the episode. I don't want to spoil it too much, but it's a really good episode. And I think what makes it is the two central performances. Jonathan Winters and Jack Klugman are fantastic in this, and it really does work really well. And it's just a game of pool, but it's brilliant. And it was recently remade as well in by the 80s version, the 87 edition of the Twilight Zone. But yeah, this was really good, and quite rightly deserves to be seen as one of the classics. Okay. So the next one was called The Mirror, and this one was written by Rod Serling as well. And The Mirror starts with this opening narration. This is the face of Ramos Clemente, a year ago a beardless, nameless worker of the dirt who plodded behind a mule following someone else's land. And he looked up at a hot Central American sun, and he pledged the impossible. He made a vow that he would lead an avenging army against a tyranny that put the ache in his back and the anguish in his eyes. And now, 1 year later, the dream of the impossible has become a fact. In just a moment, we will look deep into this mirror and see the aftermath of a rebellion in the Twilight Zone. Okay, so this one was the other one I didn't like. I was really pleased to see Peter Falk in the main role because I like Peter Falk. I do think he overdid it though. I think there was after a while it just seemed to be just utterly lacking in subtlety, even though it kind of built up, and it was nice to see Peter Falk doing something quite extrovert after watching him underacting or being really subtle with and underplaying his role in Columbo. That was all very understated and quiet, and this is like he's shouting his head off in this, and he's kind of eating the scenery. And it's a bit much because after a while you just think, actually, yes, it's a bit a one-note thing again. And there's a general message which is kind of similar to what he's done before, but the setting is different because this is set in a revolutionary country that looks like Cuba, and Peter Falk looks like Castro. It's like Rod Serling's making a comment about Cuba. So that's not the same as making a comment about Hitler. And I think that was a little bit jarring for me. But the general message that revolutionaries do get paranoid and that they can end up suffering from that paranoia in a really severe way is a good message. Done really well. But some elements of the acting in general I didn't really like. And yeah, the fact that he looked so much like Castro and it looked a little bit like America being very anti-Cuba. I mean, this is right in the middle of the Cold War, so it's not massively shocking and surprising that this is the tone that the episode takes. But yeah, not one of my favorites. So yeah, this one didn't work as well for me. But yeah, an interesting bag of episodes. Some of the best, with a couple I didn't like that much, and a couple that were fine in between. So season 3 is on its way. It's rattling along. There are a few of my favorites in the season 3, definitely. So we've got some really cracking ones to come really soon. Actually, there's an amazing one coming, and yeah, it's doing what it does. Twilight Zone is incredible. If you're watching these, if you've seen every single one of these explorations into Twilight Zone, it's made you want to watch them, then that'd be great because it is such a special TV show. Thanks for watching. Stay curious, everyone. Bye.
picture of what it's like to be you.